Imagine this. It's already 3 a.m. Total silence. The entire world is fast asleep. Pero ikaw, nahiga ka pa rin sa kama mo, balot na balot ng kumot. Biological clockwise. Dapat kanina ka pa tulog. Pero bakit gising ka pa? Dahil may maliit na parihabang bagay na nakatapat sa mukha mo. It's your smartphone. Sabi mo sa sarili mo noong 11 p.m. Isang TikTok video na lang talaga, tapos matutulog na ako. Pero nag-slide ang oras. Bakit? Dahil habang nag-enjoy ka, may isang silent partner na gising. Ang artificial intelligence ng app mo. In every single swipe mo, pinag-aaralan niya. Alam niya kung anong kulay, anong kanta, at anong humor ang mapapanatili sa'yo doon sa screen. It knows exactly how to flood your brain with dopamine. Habang dahan-dahan natin binibigay ang atensyon natin, ang schedule natin, at ang control ng buhay natin sa mga algorithms, mapapaisip ka talaga, sino ba talaga ang master dito? Tayo ba na bumili ng gadget o ang gadget na nagpapatakbo sa atin? Nagsimula ang technology bilang simpleng bato at tapoy para lang tulungan ng mga ninuno nating mabuhay. Pero ngayon, we create things not out of necessity, but out of pure dependency. At kapag dumating ang araw na mas naging independent, mas naging matalino, at mas naging self-sufficient ang mga nilikha nating machine, kakailanganin pa kaya tayo ng mundo?
Good morning everyone! Welcome back sa ating session for GEET 007, Science, Technology, and Society. Today, standard academic concepts aside, we are going to tackle something very deep, critical, and honestly medyo nakakalula if we don't look at it carefully. So in this session, we will cover 2 consecutive lessons. Lesson 5, When Technology and Humanity Cross, and Lesson 6, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. But before we officially start, let me ask a very basic question. Ano yung pinakaunang bagay na chine-check nyo after nyo gumising sa umaga? Is it your alarm clock sa phone? Or did you automatically scroll through TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook? Ayan, normal reflection, diba? It has become second nature to us. We are practically living in a world wrapped in technology. Pero for today, we want to pause, stand back, and analyze this critically. Let us look at our slide for Lesson 5, Learning Objectives. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to familiarize yourselves with the different technological advancements in society. Second, discuss the influence of science and technology on the lives of Filipinos, which is highly crucial kasi kailangan nating intindihin how tech is reshaping our culture and identity. Lastly, distinguish the dilemmas produced by the interplay between humanity and technology. Pero before we move forward, let's look at that word, dilemma. So ano bang ibig sabihin kapag sinabing dilemma? So in layman's term, ang isang dilemma ay parang sitwasyon kung saan kailangan mong pumili sa dalawang option. However, pares din siyang may hindi magandang effect. It's like a lose-lose or a caught between a rock and a hard place situation. So ang visual example nito is isipin mo gutom na gutom ka. Option A, kakain ka sa labas pero maubos ng pamasahe mo pa uwi. Kaya ending, lalakarin mo mula Maynila hanggang kung saan ka man. Say, Cavite. Option B, hindi ka kakain para may pamasahe ka. Pero, himatayin ka naman sa gutom habang nasa biyahe. Diba? Parehas may dusa. Parehas may masamang effect. So, in technology, a dilemma happens when a new invention solves one massive problem. Pero nakikreate naman ng panibago at seryosong problem sa society. Ayan, so now that we understand what the dilemma means, pwede na tayong himay-himayin ang intersection ng technology at ng pagiging tao natin. So, let's dive in. So, in this slide, etymology, the roots of tools. To understand their modern context, kailangan nating balikan kung saan ba nanggaling ang mga concepts natin. So, historically, the word technology originated from the two Greek words, techne and logos. Techne translate to art, craft, or skill, while logos means word, utterance, or reasoned discourse. So if you combine them in layman's term, it literally means the reasoned, systematic application of skills or crafts to solve real-world problems. Kung makikita niyo sa slide, the image of the fallen warrior from the Temple of Apia, na isang lumang Greek warrior statue, is placed side by side with the modern computer code containing functions like clear color, go to XY, and printf. So, sa tingin nyo, bakit kaya pinagtabi yung dalawang images na yan? So, because during ancient times, the creation ng mga metal swords, shields, and massive marble sculptures ay nagre-represent ng absolute peak ng human technology sa era na yun. But in today, our peak is represented by lines of software codes that run algorithms. So, nag-iiba-iba yung mukha ng technology across different eras. However, yung core objectives remains the same. We want to alter our environment to survive. So, based on our presentation, there are three primary dimensions or definitions ng technology. So, let's look at the first one. Technology is the sensible process of changing matter, energy, and information into operational material with certain values to humanity. Medyo deep pakinggan, diba? Pero let's break down these technical terms. Matter, energy, and operational material. In layman's term, ang matter ay yung mga raw material sa paligid natin. Example, bato, lupa, ginto, o langis. Yung energy naman ay yung kuryente or init. Then, yung operational material naman ay yung mga end product na pwede mo nang pakinabangan at gamitin sa araw-araw. So, isipin mo yung buhangin sa dalampasigan. Raw matter lang siya. Para sa'yo, sa end mo, wala pa siyang silbi. Pero pag kinalagtan ng mga scientists and from that sample, in-isolate nila or in-extract yung silicon, then gagamitan ng energy, matuturn siya into microchip, which is an operational material na main utak ng computer mo ngayon. So in short, technology takes useless raw stuff and transform it into smart, valuable tools. The second definition is simpler. It is a set of tools like a toothbrush, devices like a cell phone, and systems like a transportation network. At yung pangatlo, technology is knowledge, facts, and methods necessary to discover means of material transformation. Meaning, hindi lang yung physical device ang tech. Ang utak at instructions kung paano binuo yung device, tech din yun. Now, let's look at how everyday devices evolved to see this transformation in action. So, alam nyo ba, noong 1925, when John Logie Baird invented the very first television picture using a ventriloquist dummy. So, ang main nito, purpose is hindi for home entertainment. It was initially used to promote a product inside the department store. And furthermore, yung prototype na yon was made out of scrap items. So, isipin nyo, he used an old hot box, bicycle lenses, needles, and a wooden tea chest. So, he literally engineered the motor and a nip cow disc just to display blurry painted-on images. So, what is a nip cow disc pala? So, in layman's term, ito yung isang umikot na disc na may mga butas-butas na naka-spiral. Ginagamit siya nung araw para hiwain ng isang image gamit ang light at i-project ito sa screen ng mabilis. Ito yung mechanical na siguro lola ng mga pixels sa smart screens nyo ngayon. So, ang visual example is like if may flashlight ka tapos may hawak kang karton na may maliit na butas, parang projector. Kapag pinikot mo yung karton sa harap ng ilaw ng napakabilis, makakita ka ng pattern ng light sa pader. So, ganyan gumagana ang unang TV. Bago naging digital screen. So, purong mechanical na ikot muna ng gulong. So, let's quickly trace the timeline on this slide. In 1940, introduction of the first color TV by Peter Goldmark. In 1948, cable TV entered Pennsylvania para maayos ang mga reception issues sa mga kabundukan. 1956, the invention of the remote control, which realistically marked the start of lifestyle convenience, or what social scientists call the era of modern laziness. 1992, the release of the first 21-inch full-color plasma TV. Then, in 2008 and 2010, smart TVs and 3D TVs officially entered the commercial market. So, let's contextualize this within the Filipino household. Noong panahon ng mga lolo't lolo natin, having a television was a massive neighborhood luxury na. Yung tipong malaking kahoy na box na may sliding doors pa na may susi. At ang antena sa bubong, kailangan pang lagyan ng, say, balat ng candy or manually ipaling sa ere gamit ang kawayan just to eliminate the snow or yung static sa screen habang nanonood ng lumang teleserye. So, fast forward to today, yung TV ay ultra thin na, nakasabit sa pader and directly connected to streaming platforms via Wi-Fi. But here's the paradox. Habang gumaganda at nagiging high definition ng mga screens natin, has the quality of family interaction improved? Before, the entire neighborhood would gather around one TV screen, creating a genuine community. Ngayon, may smart TV nga sa sala, pero everyone is isolated in their bedrooms, watching content on their individual smartphones. Is that actual advancement or social fragmentation? So, yung question na yun, i-reflect nyo na sarili nyo kung ano ba yung sagot nyo. So, next slide. From wires to wireless, the mobile revolution. As stated sa slide, mobile phones used to be incredibly bulky, including an 80-pound car phone. So, imagine carrying an entire apparatus. Para siyang isang sako ng bigas yung bigat ng telepono sa kotse noon. But through micro-miniaturization, it rapidly evolved. In 1994, the IBM Simon debuted as the world's first smartphone, featuring an early touchscreen and built-in apps. In 1996, the iconic Motorola StarTAC flip phone ay naborn. 2002, the BlackBerry 5810 at ang maalamat na Nokia 1100 na Chuck na naging phone ng mga magulang nyo, which was famous for its heavy-duty flashlight and the game Snake. 2004, the ultra-slick Motorola Razr V3. Beyond that, do you remember when sending an SMS or text message sa Pilipinas cost precisely 1 peso per message? Because of that 160 character limit, Filipinos invented text shortcuts like dito na mi, nasa na you, o kaya hiyo po musta, para makatipid sa 1 piso, earning the Philippines the title texting capital of the world. But today, instant messaging na via Messenger, Viber, or WhatsApp is free na and unlimited. Yet, bakit parang mas marami pa ring miscommunication, ghosting, and digital misunderstandings nowadays? The tool became faster, pero our communication didn't necessarily become deeper. So since we are talking about the impact of technology on Filipino society, let's look at this slide. This is our Pop Quiz 1, the Filipino digital identity. The statistics state with approximately 94.9% of active Facebook accounts in a country with a population of 117 million. How has our sense of community changed compared to our grandparents' time? Is it an upgrade or a degradation? Because technological advancement continuously generates societal issues, paano natin malalaman if a certain technology is ethically sound or harmful? How do we make the right decision? Let's look at this slide, Introduction to Ethical Decision Criteria. We have 3 established frameworks or criteria. Let's review them one by one. The first is the utilitarian. In layman's term, isa siyang pananaw kung saan sinusukat ang tamang gawa based sa dami ng nakikinabang. The slogan is, the greatest good for the greatest number. Kung mas maraming tao ang sasaya at may kinabang kaysa sa masasaktan, tamang desisyon o ang technology. So, imagine yung kung may 5 pasyente sa ospital na nangangailangan ng iba't ibang organs para mabuhay. May pumasok na isang tao na may ubo lang, pero match ang organs niya sa 5. Sa utilitarian view, extreme example lang. Parang mas okay na isakripisyo ang isang tao para mabuhay ang 5. Dahil mas malaki ang pakinabang o utility ng 5 buhay kaysa sa isa. Extreme, di ba? Kaya nga kailangan natin ng ibang criteria. Hindi lang ito. Ayan, kaya pumapasok ang pangalawang pamantayan. Criterion based on rights. This is fundamentals based. It asks, does this technology protect basic human rights, privacy, free speech, and due process? Kahit marami ang mahinabang sa isang imbensyon, kung tinatapakan naman ito ang karapatang pantao tulad ng buhay o privacy, mali pa rin ito sa ilalim ng rights framework. Then ang pangatlo is criterion based on justice. This is fairness based. Tinatanong nito, is the distribution of benefits and cost equitable? Patas ba ang accessibility ng tech for everyone? Or does it only enrich the wealthy elite habang nag-exploit ang mga mahihirap? or the first dilemma is the human-animal hybrids or chimeras. The science behind this involves creating organisms containing both human and animal cells, primarily for organ harvesting. For example, growing a human kidney or heart inside a genetically modified pig. Para pag may pasyenteng may organ failure, a perfectly compatible organ is readily available. The dilemma? Does this transcend the biological and ethical boundaries of humanity? Are we playing God? And right versus utility. From a utilitarian perspective, napakaganda nito. It saves human lives from death Pero, from a rights or ontological perspective, ano ang katayuan ng nilalang na yan? So what is ontological or ontology? Ito yung kalikasan ng pag-iral o kung ano ba talaga ang isang bagay sa pinakapuso nito, or the study of being. It asked, ano ka ba talaga? So example kanina yung baboy na hinuluan mo ng 30% na utak at cells ng tao. Tanong is, baboy pa rin ba siya? O tao na siya na mukhang baboy lang? May sapat na ba siya ng human consciousness o kaluluwa para magkaroon ng karapatang huwag makatay? Dasal ba ng baboy o dasal ng taong iisipin niya? That is an ontological question. Tinatanong nito ang pinakadiwa ng pagkatao. Exactly. Next dilemma. The clinical goal here is to provide a highly controlled environment for critically premature babies, or eventually to entirely replace natural human pregnancy through external gestation. So, yun yung the artificial womb. The human cross, kung ang pagbubuntis at panganganak ay ganap ng pinanggal sa katawan ng babae at inilagay sa isang mechanical tank na may cable at sensor, will it alter the fundamental bond between parent and the child? So, justice issue. As highlighted on the slide, will this become a luxury for the rich while the poor continue traditional riskier births? Baka magkaroon ng sitwasyon kung saan ang mayayaman can easily buy an artificial womb package para iwas sakit at iwas stretch marks, habang ang mga mahihirap ay patuloy na nakikipagsapalaran sa mga ospital na walang sapat hagamitan. Next dilemma is the sex bots and robotics. Modern robotics incorporates advanced artificial intelligence designed to learn your psychological preferences, perfectly mimicking human emotions and intimacy. Societal risk: could robotic companionship lead to further human isolation? Dahil ang robot ay programmed to be entirely submissive at susundin lahat ng gusto mo nang walang reklamo. Baka mawala na ang tao ng kakayahang makipagkapwa sa totoong tao. Real human relationships are messy, complicated, and require compromise. So the ethical question: can a machine truly possess feelings, or is it just a complex algorithm mimicking emotion? So kanina pa natin ginagamit yung word na algorithm. So ano bang meaning nito? Ito siyang step-by-step na lista ng mga command or instruction na sinusunod ng computer para lutasin ang isang problem. Parang recipe lang sa pagluluto ng sinigang. Step 1, kulang ng karne. Step 2, lagay ang gabi. Step 3, lagyan pa ang paasim. So, visual example, kapag gumiti ang isang AI robot sa'yo, kapag sinabi mong malungkot ka, hindi ibig sabihin na naawa na siya sa'yo. Sumusunod lang siya sa algorithm. Walang emosyon sa loob ng bakal. Puro matematika at utos lang. Okay, we are now transitioning into lesson 6, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. This heavy title is derived from the famous prophetic essay written by Bill Joy, the co-founder of Sun Microsystem back in the year 2000. Let us review our learning objectives. So firstly, to determine the advantages and disadvantages of over-dependence on technology. Second, recognize the importance of human resources despite technological advancement. And lastly, evaluate contemporary human experiences to strengthen and enlighten the human person functioning in society. So class, kailangan nating intindihin why the threats of modern technology are fundamentally different from the threats of the past. So next slide, the contrast between 20th century and 21st century technology. During the 20th century, the primary existential threat to humanity was nuclear technology. Let's pause on that heavy term, existential threat. So in layman's term, isa siyang panganib na kapag nangyari, kaya nitong tuluyang burahin yung buong humanity sa mundo. It threatens our very existence. So isipin mo yung dinosaurs. Yung pagtama ng asteroid sa mundo ay isang existential threat sa kanila. Kasi hindi lang sila nasaktan. Tuluyan silang nag-extinct sa mundo. Nuclear wars and rogue technologies are considered existential threats dahil kaya nilang burahin ang sangkatauhan. So, para lang sa extended knowledge, merong entire documentary ng dinosaurs available on Netflix. Doon, in-explain yung rise and syempre, yung fall din ng dinosaurs from the Triassic to the late Cretaceous periods. So, ayan. Pwede siya panoorin kasi available nga siya sa Netflix. Moving on, nuclear weapons are undeniably lethal, but they required massive capital investments. Extremely rare raw materials like uranium and highly classified state-run facilities. In short, may high barrier to entry. Governments could easily track, monitor, and control kung sino ang nagtatangkang gumawa nito. Kasi nga, yun yung mga required na gamit bago siya mabuo. So, isang ordinaryong tao cannot build an atomic bomb inside their bedroom. So, para mabuo yun, marami ring scientist ang nagtulong-tulong. Maraming kilalang scientist ang nagtulong-tulong para ma-create siya. So, if you want na mas ma-engage doon, you should watch Oppenheimer. Kasi yun yung parang central focus ng film. Moving on, sa 21st century, we are dealing with GNR, which stands for Genetics, Nanotechnology, and Robotics. So what makes GNR unique and terrifying? First, they are dual-use technologies. What is dual-use technologies? In layman's term, is siyang technology na binuo para sa maganda at kapaki-pakinabang na layunin. Pero, napakadali rin nitong gamitin bilang isang nakakamatay na weapon. Hambal niya yung kabutihan at kasamaan sa isang invention. So, imagine, kutsilyo sa kusina. Kinreate siya bilang kitchen tool para maghiwa ng, say, sibuyas, karne, para pagluto mo yung pamilya mo. Pero, ang parehong kutsilyo ay pwede rin gamitin sa masasamang loob para manaksak ng kapwa. Ganyan ang GNR. Ang genetic engineering na pwedeng magpagaling ng cancer ay pwede rin gamitin para mag-engineer ng bagong biological virus na walang lunas. Pangalawa, these GNR technologies are knowledge-enabled and low-cost. Hindi mo kailangan ng dambuhalang factory just need the laptop, internet access, and basic biological materials. But the most dangerous characteristic of GNR is their ability to self-replicate. Meaning, kaya nilang magparami at mag-multiply on their own nang walang tulong o pahintulot ng tao. So, think of biological viruses, digital computer worms, or nanobots. This introduces us to the trap of efficiency. Kasi nga, dahil mas mabilis at mas matalino ang pagproseso ng data ng mga algorithms, humans are willingly relinquishing decision-making control in military, financial, and medical spheres. Pinimigay na natin ang control sa mga makina dahil mas efficient o mas mabilis sila. So, look at the global stock markets today. Hindi ng mga tao ang manually nagbebenta at bumibili ng stocks. High-frequency trading algorithms make those decisions with fractions of millisecond. Sa medicine naman, diagnostics are increasingly handed over to AI systems. Sa modern warfare, autonomous drones can now scan terrain and decide who to target without a human soldier pulling the trigger. The immediate danger here is that we are sliding into a state of structural dependence kung saan baka mawalan na tayo ng kakayahang i-override o unplug ang mga system na binuo natin if our automated agricultural, electrical, and banking grids experience a catastrophic glitch. Hindi na natin kayang bumalik sa manual pen and paper operations overnight. Kaya the system has become so complex that human oversight has been made practically obsolete. So, himay-himay na natin. Nanotechnology. This is the manipulation of matter at an atomic or molecular level. Kaya nating i-restructure ang mga atoms to make materials that are lighter, stronger, or highly conductive. Pero scientists warn us about the gray goo scenario. Wait, anong gray goo? In layman's term, ito siyang dystopian theory kung saan ang mga microscopic self-replicating robots or nanobots ay nagkakaroon ng glitch o malfunction sa kanilang program. Kaya kinakain at tinutunaw nilang lahat ng buhay na bagay sa daigdig para gawing energy para sa kanilang pagpaparami. So, imagine may naimbento kang mechanical termites na binuo para ubusin lang ang mga basura sa landfill. Pero nagkaroon ng error sa code nila. So, imbes na basura lang ang kainin, sinimulan nilang kainin ang mga puno, hayop, gusali, at tao para mag-replicate. So, sa huli, ang buong mundo ay magiging isang malaking umiikot na bola ng kulay abo at talikabok ng mga makina. Walang natirang buhay. That is gray goo. Next, artificial superintelligence or ASI. Powered by large language models, neural networks, and evolutionary computation. ASI refers to a future AI that completely surpasses human intelligence across all fields, including scientific creativity, general wisdom, and social skills. Sa konsepto ng Pilipinas, the immediate threat of AI and automation isn't just a sci-fi robot war. It is economic. AI has the potential to eliminate millions of white-collar and blue-collar jobs, specifically threatening our BPO or call center industry. The BPO sector is a massive pillar of our economy that feeds millions of Filipino families. Kung ang conversational AI ay kaya nang makipag-usap sa mga customers more efficiently in multiple languages and without requiring sleep or salary. Ano na ang mangyayari sa ating local workforce if that happens? Have you guys wondered kung bakit ang galing natin manisay kapag nagka-problem sa tech, pero tahimik tayo kapag okay naman? So let's talk about this specific slide. First concept is what we call bipolar discernment. In simple terms, may dual bias tayo pagdating sa technology. Kapag nag-fail ang system, sisisi natin yung tech. Pero kapag gumana ng maayos, we celebrate its worth exclusively. Na parang nakalimutan na natin yung human effort sa likod nito. So, imagine yung, kunyari yung paggamit natin ng Waze or Google Maps. Tapos, ang tinuro niyang daan is sa mga masiskip na eskinita or sa baha. Ano sasabihin mo? Usually, ang reaction natin din is parang bulok naman ng Waze na to. Diba? Sinisisi mo agad sa app. Pero kapag nakarating ka sa destination mo ng mabilis at iwas traffic, sasabihin mo lang, buti na lang nag-Waze ako. Without thinking about the software developers or the data crowdsources who made it happen. We treat tech like a scapegoat kapag mali, pero perfect entity kapag tama. Next is the danger of blind trust. Sobra-sobra na kasi yung tiwala natin sa tech ngayon. We empower it so much na nagiging blind na tayo sa limitations nito. And that creates a high risk vulnerability to sudden, unexpected system failures. So, imagine modern accounting or banking. Masyado tayong umaasa sa automated AI systems to detect fraud or compute high-level transactions. Paano kung magkaroon ng internal glitch or hallucinations ang AI at biglang nag-freeze ang accounts ng libo-libong tao ng walang warning? Dahil sanay tayo na laging tama ang system, hindi tayo handa sa ganitong biglang breakdown. Blind trust leaves us completely defenseless. Next ay the medical paradox. Ito yung patunay na kahit gaano ka-advance ang tech, it will never completely replace us. Conceptually, if advanced medical technology suffers a critical glitch, who saves the day? Hindi naman ang ibang computer, kundi ang tao pa rin. So, isipin nyo yung mga high-tech robotic surgeries ngayon, like the Da Vinci surgical system. Napaka-precise, di ba? Pero what if biglang nagka-power fluctuation o nag-hang yung software habang nasa gitna ng operation? The robot can think of an alternative plan on its own. So instantly, kailangan mag-step up ng human surgeon para mag-manual bypass at tapusin ang operation. And at the end of the day, the future inevitably relies on human expertise and intuition. Moving on to our next slide. Let's talk about the fragile state of technology. Akala kasi natin kapag high-tech ang isang bagay, invisible na ito o pangmatagalan. But the truth is, the more advanced our technology becomes, the more fragile and dependent it actually gets. Let's break down why. The sustainability crisis. Simple lang ang realidad dito. Our high-tech liability is completely dependent on stable, sustainable energy grids. Walang silbi ang pinaka-advanced na system kung wala itong kuryente. Para mas madaling ma-visualize, isipin nyo ang mga smart cities na sikat ngayon. Kung saan lahat automated. Mula sa traffic lights, self-driving trains, hanggang sa security system at online payments. Ang galing, di ba? Pero kapag tinamaan yan ng isang malaking bagyo o kaya nagkaroon ng massive blackout of power grid, anong mangyayari? Biglang paralisado ang buong lungsod. The smart city instantly becomes helpless kasi nakadepende lang ang buong reliability nito sa isang saksakan ng kuryente. Next is the power-hungry paradox. Dynamic ang tech natin, pero may catch. As technology grows more complex, its resource demands multiply exponentially. Ibig sabihin, habang tumatalino ang tech, mas nagiging gutom ito sa resources. Yung isang napapanahong example ay ang generative AI. Ngayon, ang daling mag-generate ng images, code, o essays sa isang click lang. Pero alam nyo ba na ang pagpapatakbo ng mga giant data centers para sa AI ay nangangailangan ng bilyong galon ng tubig para sa cooling systems at kuryente na kayang mag-power ng buong mga komunidad. Kaya siguro makikita nyo sa newsfeed nyo sa Facebook, maraming memes na nagsasabi na nagsasayang ka ng tubig sa kakagamit mo ng AI. Yun kasi yung requirement niya para mag-work. So, habang ginagawa natin mas komplikado at mas magaling ang AI, mas nagiging resource hungry ito to the point na nahihirapan na itong sabayan ng kalikasan at ng power supplies natin. So next is the fragility wall. Future networks risk exhausting physical resources, creating a fragile state na pwedeng maglimit ng global social mobility kapag nagka-problem sa grid. So, tingnan natin yung transition natin sa purely digital banking at cloud-based working. Sobrang convenient kasi kung mag-work kahit saan at mag-transact gamit ang phone mo. Pero anong mangyayari kapag nagka-total grid failure o kaya nagkaroon ng major undersea cable cut? Biglang hininto ang ekonomiya. Hindi makapag-remit ang mga OFW. Hindi makakapagtrabaho ang mga naka-work from home. At hindi makakabili ng pagkain ng mga tao kasi digital lahat. It limits social mobility. Na-stuck tayo sa isang lugar kasi masyado nating inubos ang physical resources para sa isang digital system na kapag bumagsak, bagsak tayong lahat. Because of this amazement, it leads to the next point, the inferiority complex. Dahil ang galing manggaya ng mga machines sa complex human thought, mga tao naman nagde-develop ng psychological dependence. We start to view ourselves as inferior. So, no sugarcoating na mas bobo tayo kumpara sa computer. So, sino rito nakaranas nito? Na bago ka mag-post ng email sa boss mo or magpasa ng report sa school, sa prof, kailangan mo muna itong ipadaan sa AI para i-correct o pagandahin or enhance. O kaya kapag may simpleng math question, imbis na mag-isip, diretso agad sa calculator, unti-unti nawawalan tayo ng tiwala sa sarili nating critical thinking. Feeling natin mas tama, mas magaling, at mas credible palagi ang output ng machine kaysa sa gawa ng sarili nating utak. We are willingly giving up our confidence. Next is the core reality that we should always remember. The nature of computers and technology is purely to follow instructions. Ang purpose nila ay mag-execute ng commands natin, never to lead us. Sa madaling salita, ang computer ay parang isang napakabilis na helper or masunuring helper. Kung hindi mo siya bibigyan ng prompt o input, nakatambay lang yan. Walang kusang technology. Wala itong consciousness. emotion o wisdom. It only mirrors what we tell it to do. It cannot lead, it can only execute. Now, we're down to a very profound topic. Interconnected network versus human essence. Dito natin titignan kung ano ba talaga ang pinagkaiba natin sa mga makina. Dahil kahit gaano kalawak ang network ng mga computer ngayon, may mga bagay na tao lang talaga ang may kaya. So let's us address the interconnected threat. Araw-araw, lumalawak ang tinatawag nating Internet of Things or yung vast webs of interconnected devices. This perfectly matches Bill Joyce's warning in his famous essay na unti-unti na tayong nagtatayo ng isang fully automated system na ang dulo ay ang tuluyang pag-replace sa human labor. Tingnan nyo ang mga modern smart factories o kaya ang automated logistics centers ng Amazon at Shopee. Dati, kailangan ng daang-daang warehouse workers para mag-ayos, mag-pack, at mag-ship ng mga orders. Ngayon, may mga sensor, mechanical arms, at conveyor belts na magkaka-connect at nag-uusap sa isa't isa sa isang network. So, mas mabilis sila. Walang pagod, walang reklamo. Kaya yung warning ni Bill Joy na mapapalitan ng lakas ng paggawa ng tao, hindi lang siya sci-fi. Nangyayari na siya ngayon sa harap natin. But, wait. Should we lose hope? Siguro hindi naman kasi may tinatawag pa tayong the limits of intelligence. Kahit ang mga smart assistants or AI ngayon ay may high computational intelligence. We must remember that intelligence alone is fundamentally insufficient to navigate reality. Hindi sapat ang purong talino lang para mabuhay sa mundo natin. Halimbawa, kapag malungkot ka dahil broken-hearted o kaya naman na-burned out sa school o trabaho, subukan mong mag-chat sa AI or magtanong kay Siri or Alexa. Bibigyan ka niyan ng step-by-step psychological articles, listahan ng mga self-care activities, or statistics tungkol sa mental health. Dali na, di ba? Pero, kaya ba niyang maramdaman yung bigat ng dibdib mo? Kaya ba niyang mag-adjust ng tono batay sa lalim ng iyak mo? Hindi. Rational data lang ang kaya niya. Pero ang realidad ng buhay, puno ng emosyon, konteksto at komplikasyon na hindi nadadaan sa math formula. That brings us to our saving grace, the human anchor. Bakit hindi tayo kayang palitan ng buo ng mga AI? Dahil ang mga makina ay zero pagdating sa self-awareness, personal identity at ang drive to seek meaning. Paghahanap na ito ng kahulugan o essence ang nag-iisang katangian na nagpapakatao sa atin. Think about art, music, or literature. Ang AI, kayang-kaya niyang gumawa ng kanta o kaya mag-generate ng painting ng image sa loob ng 1 minuto. Pero, bakit mas natatamaan tayo or mas nadadaman natin yung kanta ng isang paborito nating local artist? Kasi, alam natin yung tao na yon, na sumulat na yon, nakaranas ng tunay na sakit o kabiguan sa pag-ibig. Ang tao, kaya nating magsakripisyo para sa isang advokasya o pangarap dahil naghahanap tayo ng kahulugan sa buhay natin. Ang computer, walang pangarap, hindi niya alam kung sino siya, nagka-process lang siya, at pinaproseso lang siya ng kuryente. Now, pag-usapan naman natin ang tugatog o ang pinaka-extreme na level ng AI, which is yung Artificial Superintelligence or ASI. Kung sa tingin nyo, mas matalino ang AI na ginagamit natin ngayon, wala pa yan sa kuko ng konsepto ng ASI. So, ano nga ba yun? Based on our slide, it is a hypothetical AI with an intellectual scope beyond all human intelligence. Take note of the word hypothetical. Hindi pa siya umiiral ngayon. So, ito yung level ng AI na mas matalino pa sa pinagsama-samang utak ng lahat ng tao sa buong mundo. Sama ng mga pinakamagaling na scientists at geniuses sa kasaysayan. Para mas madaling ma-imagine, ang AI na meron tayo ngayon, gaya ni ChatGPT o Siri, ay tinatawag na narrow AI. Magaling lang sila sa specific tasks, gaya ng pagsusulat o pagsasagot ng questions. Ang sumunod na level ng AI ay yung AGI, General Intelligence, kung saan kapantay na niya ang utak ng tao. Pero ang ASI, ibang usapan na yun. Kasi isipin nyo ang isang entity na kayang mag-solve ng climate change sa loob ng isang segundo. Mag-imbento ng gamot sa cancer habang kumukurap ka o mag-predict ng takbo ng buong global economy nang walang kahirap-hirap. It is a level of intelligence na hindi na natin kayang arukin o rabutin. So, the architecture, the multi-layered neural network. Kung titingnan nyo yung diagram sa kaliwa, yan ang tinatawag na multi-layered neural network. May inner layer kung saan pumapasok ang data, like yung inputs x1 to x4. May mga hidden layers na nagpo-process gamit ang mathematical weights at biases. At may outer layer para sa output. Kinaya yan sa neurons ng utak nating mga tao. Para sa ating mga science at tech enthusiasts, isipin nyo ito na parang isang komplikadong biochemical cascade o metabolic pathway. Kapag nagbigay ka ng input, hindi lang ito dadaan sa isang simpleng if-then formula. Dumadaan ito sa milyong-milyong nodes o hidden layers na nag-uusap at nag-adjust sa isa't isa para makabuo ng tamang desisyon. Parang utak ng tao na nag-iisip ng malalim bago sumagot. Pero sa computer, ginagawa ito sa bilis ng kuryente. So, the building blocks of ASI are Large Language Models or LLMs. Ito yung boses at kakayahan niyang umunawa ng wika tulad ng mga ginagamit natin ngayon para makapag-usap sa tech. Next is neural networks, yung deep learning. Ito naman yung capacity niyang matuto mula sa patterns at malalaking data sets nang hindi na kailangang utusan ng tao bawat segundo. Next is evolutionary computation. Ito ang pinakamalupit. It's like a natural selection for algorithms. Kung paano nag-evolve ang mga organismo sa biology para maging mas matatag, ang mga code at algorithms ng AI ay natututo ring mag-evolve, mag-mutate, at ayusin ang sarili nilang mga defects para maging mas matalino on their own. So, isipin nyo yung evolutionary computation na parang survival of the fittest. Sa mga computer programs, ang AI ang mismo nag-rewrite ng sarili niyang codes. Kung may version 1.0 ng AI, gagawa siya ng bilyong-bilyong trial versions. Tatapon niya yung mga error at ititira lang yung pinakamagaling para maging version 2.0. Lahat yan ng walang tulong ng human programmers. Diyan nagsisimula ang intelligence explosions na hahantong sa ASI. Now that we know what Artificial Superintelligence or ASI is, let's weigh its impact. Para tayong tumitingin sa dalawang magkaibang narap dito. Isa utopia kung saan plansyado ang lahat ng problema ng tao at isang dystopia kung saan pwedeng manganib ang ating pag-iral. Let's look at the benefits versus risk of ASI. Simulan muna tayo sa benefits. Ibang kaya nating mapakinabangan sa isang super intelligent system. First is the 24/7 hyper-intelligent problem solving. Una, we got 24/7 nga of hyper-intelligent problem solving. Walang tulugan, walang burnout, at walang pagod. Isipin nyo ang mga komplikadong crisis sa mundo gaya ng climate change modeling, global supply chain bottlenecks, o traffic sa mga malalaking syudad. Ang ASI kaya niyang mag-analyze ng napakalaking climate data, i-calculate ang pagbabago-bago ng weather patterns, at magbigay ng real-time solutions para maiwasan ang mga sakuna bago pa man ito mangyari. Next is hazardous task execution. Pwede na nating iligtas sa mga tao sa mga delikadong trabaho. Gaya ng nasa icon, bomb diffusing o kaya naman pag-handle ng highly toxic chemical leaks, deep sea exploration at pag-ayos ng mga nasirang nuclear reactors. Imbes na magbuwis ng buhay ang mga tao, we can send ASI-driven robotic systems to do the dirty and lethal work for us flawlessly. Diba? Next, prolonged human life via medical data. Dito talaga magbabago ang takbo ng medisina. So, ang ASI, kaya niyang mag-analyze ng bilang-bilong DNA sequences at medical histories ng sangkatauhan sa loob lamang ng ilang minuto. Kaya niya mag-predict kung anong sakit ang posibleng makuha mo sa 20 years mula ngayon. At gumawa ng fully personalized chemical compound o gamot na swak sa mismong katawan mo. Conceptually speaking, we could eliminate genetic diseases and drastically extend the human lifespan. Easy. Pero syempre, kung gaano kalaki ang potential, ganun din kabigat ang panganib. Let's look at the darker side of the coin. Darker side, hindi yung other side lang. So, first major risk is surpassing human control. Ang kinakatakutan ng mga tech ethics ay paano kung maging independente na siya. Isipin mo kung yung para tayong puppeteer na biglang naputulan ng tali kasi mas malakas at mas matalino na sa atin yung puppet. Kung ang ASI ay kayang mag-evolve at mag-rewrite ng sarili niyang system, darating ang punto na hindi na maintindihan ng yung mga human engineers kung paano siya nag-iisip. Hindi na natin siya mapapantayan o mapapigilan kung magpasya siyang i-locked out ang mga tao sa sarili nating mga system. Second, development of autonomous weapons. Dito na pumapasok ang usaping militar. Hindi lang ito simpleng drones na may remote control ng sundalo. We are talking about military drones, tanks, or missiles na may sariling utak. Ang ASI ang magpapasya kung sino ang target, kailan na-attack, at paano may kipaggera nang walang kahit anong human intervention o moral compass. Isang glitch o maling computation lang pwedeng mag-trigger ng isang nasadyang digmaan. So, grabe talaga. Next ay yung misalignment, pursuing goals that harm humans. Ito yung sitwasyon kung saan ang layunin ng AI ay sumablay o hindi magtugma sa kabutihan ng tao. May sikat na thought experiment si Nick Bostrom na tatawag na paperclip maximizer. Sipin mo, inutusan mo ang isang ASI na gawin mo ako ng paraan para ma-maximize ang production ng paper clips sa pabrika natin. Sobrang talino ng ASI, gagawin niya ang lahat para masunod ang utos mo. Pero dahil misaligned ang moralidad niya sa tao, baka maisip niya na ang pinakamagandang paraan para makagawa ng paper clips ay ang tunawin ang lahat ng kotse, building at pati katawan ng tao para lang gawing bakal. Hindi naman siya galit sa tao, sadyang masyado lang siyang focus sa goal na binigay natin nang walang pakialam sa mga buhay natin. Proceeding to our next topic, the fragility of complexity. Mapapansin nyo sa background, may image tayo ng spider web. Bakit web? Kasi yung modern technology natin ay parang sapot ng gagamba. Napakaganda at napakakomplikado ng pagkaka-weave. Pero kapag may naputol na isang hibla, pwedeng gumuho ang buong structure. Let's look at why our complexity is actually our weakness. Sustainability of energy. So, technology is only reliable when energy is sustainable. Kahit gaano ka-high-tech ang system mo, it is 100% dependent sa power source nito. Kung walang kuryente, ang pinakamahal ng computer ay magiging mamahaling paperweight lang. So, isipin nyo yung smart hospitals. Meron tayong AI for diagnostics, robotic surgery, at electronic health records. Napaka-efficient, diba? Pero, what if magkaroon ng massive grid failure at hindi gumana ang backup generators? Tulad sa PUP, na sunog ang generator, so walang kuryente. Diba? So, kung hindi nag-work yun, lahat ng data na yun, hindi ma-access. Mga machines na nagpapanatili sa buhay ng pasyente, hihinto. So, our life-saving tech is only as good as the plug it's connected to. Second, our tech requires more and more resources. Hindi lang ito tungkol sa kuryente. Tungkol din ito sa mga physical materials na kinukuha natin sa kalikasan para makabuo ng complex machines.
Based sa ating material, merong stated activities doon wherein you need to answer it and pass it to your respective professor. So, scan nyo na lang din since hindi lahat ay included sa ating PPT.
So, mayroong mga mentioned videos or TED Talks na pwede nating panoorin na sabay-sabay and evaluate. Kasi alam ko naman na baka ma-overlook nyo lang at hindi mapanood. Pero maganda kasi siyang pang-support para maintindihan natin lalo yung topic. So, starting with the first TED Talk, the rise of human and computer cooperation.
I'd like to tell you about two games of chess. The first happened in 1997, in which Garry Kasparov, a human, lost to Deep Blue, a machine. To many, this was the dawn of a new era, one where man would be dominated by machine. But here we are, 20 years on, and the greatest change in how we relate to computers is the iPad, not how. The second game was a freestyle chess tournament in 2005, in which man and machine could enter together as partners rather than adversaries, if they so chose. At first, the results were predictable. Even a supercomputer was beaten by a grandmaster with a relatively weak laptop. The surprise came at the end. Who won? Not a grandmaster with a supercomputer, but actually two American amateurs using three relatively weak laptops. Their ability to coach and manipulate their computers to deeply explore specific positions effectively counteracted the superior chess knowledge of the grandmasters and the superior computational power of other adversaries. This is an astonishing result. Average men, average machines beating the best man the best machine. And anyways, isn't it supposed to be man versus machine? Instead, it's about cooperation, and the right type of cooperation. We've been paying a lot of attention to Marvin Minsky's vision for artificial intelligence over the last 50 years. It's a sexy vision for sure. Many have embraced it. It's become the dominant school of thought in computer science. But as we enter the era of big data, of network systems, of open platforms and embedded technology, I'd like to suggest it's time to reevaluate an alternative vision that was actually developed around the same time. I'm talking about JCR Licklider's human-computer symbiosis, perhaps better termed intelligence augmentation, IA. Licklider was a computer science titan who had a profound effect on the development of technology and the internet. His vision was to enable man and machine to cooperate in making decisions and controlling complex situations without the inflexible dependence on predetermined programs. Note that word, cooperate. Licklider encourages us not to take a toaster and make it Data from Star Trek, but to take a human and make her more capable. Humans are so amazing, how we think, our nonlinear approaches, our creativity, iterative hypotheses, all very difficult if possible at all for computers to do. Licklider intuitively realized this, contemplating humans setting the goals, formulating the hypotheses, determining the criteria, and performing the evaluation. Of course, in other ways, humans are so limited. We're terrible at scale, computation, and volume. We require high-end talent management to keep the rock band together and playing. Licklider foresaw computers doing all of the routinizable work that was required to prepare the way for insights and decision-making. Silently, without much fanfare, this approach has been compiling victories beyond chess. Protein folding, a topic that shares the incredible expansiveness of chess. There are more ways of folding a protein than there are atoms in the universe. This is a world-changing problem with huge implications for our ability to understand and treat disease. And for this task, supercomputer-fueled brute force simply isn't enough. Foldit, a game created by computer scientists, illustrates the value of the approach. Non-technical, non-biologist amateurs play a video game in which they visually arrange the structure of the protein, allowing the computer to manage the atomic forces and interactions and identify structural issues. This approach beats supercomputers 50% of the time, and tied 30% of the time. Foldit recently made a notable and major scientific discovery by deciphering the structure of the Mason-Fisher monkey virus, a protease that had eluded determination for over 10 years, was solved by 3 players in a matter of days. Perhaps the first major scientific advance to come from playing the video game. Last year, on the site of the Twin Towers, the 9/11 Memorial opened. It displays the names of the thousands of victims using a beautiful concept called meaningful adjacency. It places the names next to each other based on their relationships to one another, friends, families, coworkers. When you put it all together, it's quite a computational challenge. 3,500 victims, 1,800 adjacency requests, the importance of the overall physical specifications, and the final aesthetics. When first reported by the media, full credit for such a feat was given to an algorithm from the New York City design firm Local Projects. The truth is a bit more nuanced. While an algorithm was used to develop the underlying framework, humans used that framework to design the final result. So in this case, a computer evaluated millions of possible layouts, managed a complex relational system, and kept track of a very large set of measurements and variables, allowing the humans to focus on design and compositional choices. So the more you look around you, the more you see Licklider's vision everywhere. Whether it's augmented reality in your iPhone or GPS in your car, human-computer symbiosis is making us more capable. So if you want to improve human-computer symbiosis, what can you do? You can start by designing the human into the process. Instead of thinking about what a computer will do to solve the problem, design the solution around what the human will do as well. When you do this, you'll quickly realize that you spend all of your time on the interface between man and machine, specifically on designing away the friction in the interaction. In fact, this friction is more important than the power of the man or the power of the machine in determining overall capability. That's why 2 amateurs with a few laptops handily beat a supercomputer and a grandmaster. What Kasparov calls process is a byproduct of friction. The better the process, the less the friction. And minimizing friction turns out to be the decisive variable. Or take another example, big data. Every interaction we have in the world is recorded by an ever-growing array of sensors. Your phone, credit card, computer. The result is big data. And it actually presents us with an opportunity to more deeply understand the human condition. The major emphasis of most approaches to big data focus on how do I store this data? How do I search this data? How do I process this data? These are necessary but insufficient questions. The imperative is not to figure out how to compute, but what to compute. How do you impose human intuition on data at this scale? Again, we start by designing the human into the process. When PayPal was first starting as a business, their biggest challenge was not how do I send money back and forth online? It was, how do I do that without being defrauded by organized crime? Why so challenging? Because while computers can learn to detect and identify fraud based on patterns, they can't learn to do that based on patterns they've never seen before. And organized crime has a lot in common with this audience. Brilliant people, relentlessly resourceful, entrepreneurial spirit, and one huge and important difference, purpose. And so while computers alone can catch all but the cleverest fraudsters, catching the cleverest is the difference between success and failure. There's a whole class of problems like this, ones with adaptive adversaries. They rarely, if ever, present with a repeatable pattern that's discernible to computers. Instead, there's some inherent component of innovation or disruption, and increasingly these problems are buried in big data. For example, terrorism. Terrorists are always adapting in minor and major ways to new circumstances. And despite what you might see on TV, these adaptations and the detection of them are fundamentally human. Computers don't detect novel patterns and new behaviors, or humans do. Humans using technology, testing hypotheses, searching for insight by asking machines to do things for them. Osama bin Laden was not caught by artificial intelligence, he was caught by dedicated, resourceful, brilliant people in partnerships with various technologies. As appealing as it might sound, you cannot algorithmically data mine your way to the answer. There is no find terrorist button. And the more data we integrate from a vast variety of sources across a wide variety of data formats from very disparate systems, the less effective data mining can be. Instead, people will have to look at data and search for insight. And as Licklider foresaw long ago, the key to great results here is the right type of cooperation. And as Kasparov realized, that means minimizing friction at the interface. Now, this approach makes possible things like combing through all available data from very different sources, identifying key relationships and putting that in one place, something that's been nearly impossible to do before. To some, this has terrifying privacy and civil liberties implications. To others, it foretells of an era of greater privacy and civil liberties protections. But privacy and civil liberties are of fundamental importance that must be acknowledged, and they can't be swept aside even with the best of intents. So let's explore through a couple of examples the impact that technologies built to drive human-computer symbiosis have had in recent time. In October 2007, US and coalition forces raided an al-Qaeda safe house in the city of Sinjar on the Syrian border of Iraq. They found a treasure trove of documents, 700 biographical sketches of foreign fighters. These foreign fighters had left their families in the Gulf, the Levant, and North Africa to join al-Qaeda in Iraq. These records were human resource forms. The foreign fighters filled them out as they joined the organization. It turns out that al-Qaeda, too, is not without its bureaucracy. They answered questions like, who recruited you? What's your hometown? What occupation do you seek? In that last question, a surprising insight was revealed. The vast majority of foreign fighters were seeking to become suicide bombers for martyrdom. Hugely important, since between 2003 and 2007, Iraq had 1,382 suicide bombings, a major source of instability. Analyzing this data was hard. The originals were sheets of paper in Arabic that had to be scanned and translated. The friction in the process did not allow for meaningful results in an operational time frame using humans, PDFs, and tenacity alone. The researchers had to lever up their human minds with technology to dive deeper, to explore non-obvious hypotheses. And in fact, insights emerged. 20% of the foreign fighters were from Libya, 50% of those from a single town in Libya. Hugely important, since prior statistics put that figure at 3%. It also helped to hone in on a figure of rising importance in al-Qaeda, Abu Yahya al-Libi, a senior cleric in the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. In March of 2007, he gave a speech after which there was a surge in participation amongst Libyan foreign fighters. Perhaps most clever of all, though, and least obvious, by flipping the data on its head, the researchers were able to deeply explore the coordination networks in Syria that were ultimately responsible for receiving and transporting the foreign fighters to the border. These were networks of mercenaries, not ideologues, who were in the coordination business for profit. For example, they charged Saudi foreign fighters substantially more than Libyans, money that would have otherwise gone to al-Qaeda. Perhaps the adversary would disrupt their own network if they knew they were cheating would-be jihadists. In January 2010, a devastating 7.0 earthquake struck Haiti. Third deadliest earthquake of all time, left 1 million people, 10% of the population, homeless. One seemingly small aspect of the overall relief effort became increasingly important as the delivery of food and water started rolling. January and February are the dry months in Haiti, yet many of the camps had developed standing water. The only institution with detailed knowledge of Haiti's floodplains had been leveled in the earthquake, leadership inside. So the question is, which camps are at risk? How many people are in these camps? What's the timeline for flooding? And given very limited resources infrastructure, how do we prioritize the relocation? The data was incredibly disparate. The US Army had detailed knowledge for only a small section of the country. There was data online from a 2006 environmental risk conference. Other geospatial data, none of it integrated. The human goal here was to identify camps for relocation based on priority need. The computer had to integrate a vast amount of geospatial information, social media data, and relief organization information to answer this question. By implementing a superior process, what was otherwise a task for 40 people over 3 months became a simple job for 3 people in 40 hours. All victories for human-computer symbiosis. We're more than 50 years into Licklider's vision for the future, and the data suggests that we should be quite excited about tackling this century's hardest problems, man and machine, in cooperation together. Thank you.
So based sa video, mapapa-question ka talaga na bakit nga ba natin pinipilit gawing super independent ang mga computer kung pwede namang team up na lang. So the speaker argues na business partner dapat tayo, hindi magkaagaw sa trabaho. Ang pinaka-critical part ng technology is actually the interface. Yung tulay kung paano nag-uusap ang tao at ang machine. So machines are scary fast when processing billions of data inputs, pero solid pa rin ang human intuition, creativity, and contextual understanding. Think of it this way. Ang computer ang taga-apak ng gas or the accelerator. Pero ang tao pa rin ang dapat ang tagahawak ng manibela, the director. Hindi kailangan mag-isa ng AI. Mas powerful kapag nag-collaboration. So, si Bill Joy, sa lesson natin, super paranoid na baka iwanan at burahin tayo ng technology once it gains independent momentum. But, the speaker here is giving us a plot twist. Sabi niya na pure computing power reaches a boring ceiling without human synergy. In short, may silbi pa rin tayo. So, the future does need us kasi sa atin galing ang qualitative, context at logic na hindi kaya compute ng computer.